All right. All right. Can people in the back hear? Okay. We got it then. Tell me when we're on 1390. Okay. Well, what's say hello to all you people out there in TV land? Yes, something like that. Um, I was going to read you something beautiful today, right on the sense that the world is really falling apart politically and we needed something beautiful. On the other hand, this piece just kept forcing itself into my head and said, no, you must read me. So, so I thought, what could I say? So I will read this one. It's called A Modest Proposal by Jonathan Swift. And if you know Swift at all, you've probably read Gulliver's Travels. But Swift himself was he hopped around from political job to political job, always in England in the end of the 17th century, always sort of being a gadfly to the Tory government. And finally, Queen Anne had enough of him and said, you're never going to have another job in my government, go. So he did have family in Ireland. He was an Anglo-Irish person. He did have family there, so they got him a job as the Dean of St. Paul's Cathedral in Dublin, get him away from Queen Anne. And it was a job he had for the rest of his life. But of course, since he was a political radical and he'd moved from London to Dublin, he had to find himself a political radical cause in Ireland. And the cause that he adopted was the poor in Ireland, which at that time were particularly poor because the English government had given all the land in Ireland basically to its own nobility. The Anglo-Irish absentee landlords, as they call it, were just using Ireland as a milk cow to fund their own program. They didn't come to Ireland. They didn't care about Ireland. They just took the money and left. So he got very upset by that and the poverty of the Irish people. And this is what he's writing about in A Modest Proposal. I will tell you, I have to give a trigger warning. It's fairly outrageous because he is writing satire. So if you're offended, try to go with it. He wants to offend you. Okay, this is called A Modest Proposal for preventing the children of poor people in Ireland from being a burden on their parents or the country and from making them beneficial to the public, by Dr. Jonathan Swift, 1729. It is a melancholy object to those who walk through this great town or travel in the country when they see the streets, the roads, and the cabin doors crowded with beggars of the female sex, followed by 3 or 4 or 6 children, all in rags, and importuning every passenger for an alms. These mothers, instead of being able to work for their honest livelihood, are forced to employ all their time in strolling to beg sustenance for their helpless infants who, as they grow up, either turn thieves for want of work or leave their dear native country to fight for the pretender in Spain. I think it is agreed by all parties that this prodigious number of children in the arms or on the backs or at the heels of their mothers, and sometimes of their fathers, is in the present deplorable state of the kingdom a very great additional grievance. And therefore, whoever could find out a fair, cheap, and easy method of making these children sound and useful members of the Commonwealth would deserve so well of the public as to have his statue set up for the preserver of the nation. But my intention is very far from being confined to provide only for the children of the beggars. It is of a much greater extent and shall take in the whole number of infants of a certain age who are born of parents who are not able to support them, as well as those who demand charity in the streets. As to my own part, having turned my thought for many years upon this important subject and maturely weighed the several schemes of our projectors, I have always found them grossly mistaken in their computations. It is true, a child just dropped from its dam may be supported by her milk for a solar year, with little other nourishment, at most not above the value of 2 shillings, which the mother may certainly get, or in the value of scraps by her lawful occupation of begging. It is exactly at 1 year old that I propose to provide for them in such manner as, instead of being a charge upon their parents or upon the parish, or wanting food and raiment for the rest of their lives, they shall, on the contrary, contribute to the feeding and partly to the clothing of many thousands. There is likewise another great advantage in my scheme, that it will prevent those voluntary abortions and that horrid practice of women murdering their bastard children, alas, too frequent among us, sacrificing the poor innocent babes, I doubt more to avoid the expense than the shame, which would move to tears and pity the most savage and inhuman breast. The number of the souls in this Irish kingdom being usually reckoned 1.5 million. Of these, I calculate there may be about 200,000 couple whose wives are breeders, from which number I subtract 30,000 couple who are able to maintain their own children, although I apprehend there cannot be so many of these under the present distresses of this kingdom. But this being granted, there will remain 170,000 breeders. I again subtract 50,000 for those women who miscarry or whose children die by accident or disease within the year. There remain 120,000 children of poor parents annually born. The question, therefore, is, how shall this number be reared and provided for? Which, as I have already said, under the present situation of affairs, is utterly impossible by all the methods hitherto proposed. For we can neither employ them in handicraft or agriculture. They can neither build houses nor cultivate land. They can very seldom pick up a livelihood by stealing until they arrive at least 6 years old, except when they are of very forward parts, though I confess they learn the rudiments much earlier, during which time, however, they can only be looked upon as probationers. I have been informed by a principal gentleman in the county of Cavan who protested to me that he never knew above 1 or 2 instances under the age of 6, even in that part of the kingdom, so renowned for the quickest proficiency in that art. I am assured by our merchants that a boy or girl before 12 years old is no saleable commodity, and even when they come to this age, they will not yield above 3 pounds, or perhaps 3 pounds and half a crown at most, on the exchange, which cannot turn to account either to the parents or the kingdom, the charge of nutriments and rags having been at least 4 times that value. I shall now, therefore, humbly propose my own thoughts, which I hope will not be liable to the least objections. I have been assured by a very knowing American of my acquaintance that a young, healthy child, well nursed, is at a year old, a most delicious, nourishing, and wholesome food, whether stewed, roasted, baked, or boiled, and I make no doubt that it will serve equally well in a fricassee or a ragout. I do humbly offer it to the public consideration, then, that of the 120,000 children already computed, 20,000 may be reserved for breeding, whereof only 1/4 part to be males, which is more than we allow to sheep, cattle, or swine. And my reason is that these children are seldom the fruits of marriage, a circumstance not so much regarded by our savages here. Therefore, 1 male will be sufficient to serve 4 females. That the remaining 100,000 may, at a year old, be offered in sale to the persons of quality and fortune through the kingdom, always advising the mother to let them suck plentifully in the last month so as to render them plump and fat for a good table. A child will make 2 dishes at an entertainment for friends, and when the family dines alone, the fore or hind quarter will make a reasonable dish, and seasoned with a little pepper or salt will be very good boiled on the 4th day, especially in winter. I have reckoned upon a medium that a child just born will weigh 12 pounds, and in a solar year, if tolerably nursed, increase this to about 28 pounds. I grant this food will be somewhat dear, and therefore very proper for landlords, who, as they have already devoured most of the parents, seem to have the best title to the poor children. Infant's flesh will be in season throughout the year, but more plentiful in March and a little before. For we are told by a grave author, an eminent French physician, that fish being a prolific diet, there are more children born in Roman Catholic countries about 9 months after Lent than at any other season. Therefore, reckoning a year after Lent, the markets will be more glutted than usual, because the number of Catholic infants is at least 3 to 1 in this kingdom, and therefore it will have one other collateral advantage by lessening the number of Catholics among us. I have already computed the charge of nursing a beggar's child, in which list I reckon all cottagers, laborers, and 4/5 of all the farmers, to be about 2 shillings per annum, rags included. And I believe no gentleman would repine to give 10 shillings for the carcass of a good fat child, which, as I have said, will make 4 dishes of excellent nutritive meat, when he hath only some particular friend or his own family to dine with him. Thus, the squire will learn to be a good landlord and grow popular among his tenants. The mother will have 8 shillings neat profit and be fit for work until she produces another child. Those who are more thrifty may flay the carcass, the skin of which, artificially dressed, will make admirable gloves for ladies and summer boots for fine gentlemen. As to our city of Dublin, a shambles may be appointed for this purpose in the most convenient parts of it, and butchers, we may be assured, will not be wanting. Though I rather recommend buying the children alive and dressing them hot from the knife as we do roasting pigs. A very worthy person, a true lover of his country, and whose virtues I highly esteemed, was lately pleased in discoursing on this matter to offer a refinement to my scheme. He said that many gentlemen of this kingdom having of late destroyed their deer, he conceived that the want of venison might be well supplied by the bodies of young lads and maidens not exceeding 14 years of age, nor under 12. So great a number of both sexes in every country now being ready to starve for want of work and service, and these to be disposed of by their parents, if alive, or otherwise by their nearest relations. But with due deference to so excellent a friend and so deserving a patriot, I cannot altogether agree with his sentiments. For as to the males, my American acquaintance assures me from frequent experience that their flesh is generally tough and lean, like most schoolboys, by continual exercise, and their taste disagreeable, and to fatten them would not answer to the charge. Then, as to the females, it would, I think, with humble submission, be a loss to the public, because they would soon become breeders themselves. And besides, it is not improbable that some scrupulous people might be able to censure such a practice, although very unjustly so, as a little bordering upon cruelty, which I confess hath always been with me the strongest objection against any project, howsoever well intended. But in order to justify my friend, he confessed that this experience was put into head by the famous Palmanzor, a native of the island of Formosa, who came from thence to London about 20 years ago, and in conversation told my friend that in his country, when any young person happened to be put to death, the executioner sold the carcass to persons of quality as a prime dainty, and that in his time, the body of a plump girl of 15, who was crucified for her attempt to poison the emperor, was sold to his majesty's prime minister of state and other great mandarins of the court, in joints straight from the gibbet at 400 crowns. Neither can I deny that if the same use were made of several plump young girls in this town, who without one single groat to their fortunes cannot stir abroad without a chair and appear at playhouses and assemblies in foreign fineries, which they will never pay for, the kingdom would not be the worse. Some persons of a despairing spirit are in great concern about the vast number of poor people who are aged, deceased, or maimed, and I have desired to employ my thoughts what course may be taken to ease the nation of so grievance and encumbrance. But I am not in the least plain upon that matter, because it is very well known that they are every day dying and rotting by cold and famine and filth and vermin as fast as can be reasonably expected. And as to the young laborers, they are now in almost as hopeful a condition. They cannot get work and consequently pine away from want of nourishment to a degree, and that if any time they are accidentally hired for common labor, they have not the strength to perform it, and thus to the country, and themselves are happily delivered from evils to come by that. I have too long digressed, and therefore I shall return to my subject. I think the advantages of my proposal, which I have made, are obvious, and may as well be of the highest importance. For first, as I have already observed, it would greatly lessen the number of Catholics with whom we are yearly overrun, they being the principal breeders of the nation as well as our most dangerous enemies, and who stay at home on purpose with a design to deliver the Irish kingdom to the Pretender, hoping to take their advantage by the absence of so many good Protestants who have chosen to leave their country rather than pay tithes to an Episcopal curate. Secondly, the poorer tenants will have something valuable of their very own, which by law may be made liable to a seizure and help to pay their landlord's rent, their corn and cattle already being seized, and money a thing unknown to them. Thirdly, whereas the maintenance of 100,000 children from 2 years old and upwards cannot be computed at less than 10 shillings apiece per annum, The nation's stock will thereby increase 50,000 pounds per annum, besides the profit of a new dish introduced to the tables of all gentlemen of fortune in the kingdom who have any refinement in taste. And the money will circulate among ourselves, the goods being entirely of our own home growth and manufacture. Fourthly, the constant breeders, besides the gain of 8 shillings sterling per annum by the sale of the children, will be rid of the charge of maintaining them year after year. Fifthly, this food would likewise bring great custom to taverns, where the vintners will certainly be so prudent as to procure the best recipes for dressing it to perfection, and consequently have their houses frequented by all the fine gentlemen, who justly value themselves upon their knowledge in good cuisine. And a skillful cook who understands how to please his guests will contrive to make it as expensive as they wish. Sixthly, this would be a great inducement to marriage, by which all nations have either encouraged by rewards or enforced by laws and penalties. It would increase the care and tenderness of mothers toward their children when they were sure of a settlement for life for the poor babes, provided in some sort by the public purse, and to their annual profit instead of an expense. We should soon see an honest emulation among the married women, which of them could bring the fattest child to market. Men would become as fond of their wives during the time of their pregnancies as they are now of their mares in foal, their cows in calf, or their sows when they farrow, nor offer to beat them or kick them, as is too frequent now, for fear of a miscarriage. Many other advantages might be enumerated. For instance, the addition of some 1,000 carcasses in our exportation of barreled beef, the propagation of swine's flesh, and improvement in the art of making good bacon, so much wanted among us by the great destruction of pigs too frequent at our tables, which are in no way comparable in taste or magnificence to a well-grown fat yearling child, which, roasted whole, will make a considerable figure at a Lord Mayor's feast or any other public entertainment. But this and many other ideas I admit, being studious of brevity. Supposing that 1,000 families in this city would be constant customers for infant flesh, besides others who might have it at merry meetings such as weddings and christenings, I compute that Dublin would take off annually about 20,000 carcasses, and the rest of the kingdom, where they will probably go somewhat cheaper, would count 80,000. I can think of no one objection that will be possibly raised against this proposal, unless it should be urged that the number of people will be thereby much lessened in the kingdom. This I freely own, and it was indeed one principal design in offering to the world. I desire the reader will observe that I calculate my remedy for this one individual kingdom of Ireland, and for no other that ever was, is, or I think will be upon the earth. Therefore, let no man talk to me of expedience, of taxing our absentee landlords at 5 shillings a pound, of using neither clothes nor furniture except what of is our own growth and manufacture, of utterly rejecting the materials and instruments that promote foreign luxury, of curing the expensiveness of pride, vanity, idleness, and gaming in our people, of introducing a vein of parsimony, prudence, and temperance, of learning to love our country, of quitting our animosities and factions, nor acting any longer like the pagans who were murdering one another at the very moment their city was being taken, of being a little cautious not to sell our country and consciences for nothing, of teaching landlords to have at least one degree of mercy towards their tenants. Lastly, of putting a spirit of honesty, industry, and skill into our shopkeepers, who, if a resolution could now be taken to buy only our native goods, would immediately unite to exact upon us the price, the measure, and the goodness could ever be brought to make one fair proposal, a fair dealing, though often and earnestly invited to it. Therefore, I repeat, let no man talk to me of these ideas and the like expedients until he had at least some glimpse of hope that there will ever be a sincere attempt to put them in practice. But as to myself, having been wearied out for many years with offering vain, idle, and visionary thoughts, and at length utterly despairing of success, I fortunately found upon this proposal, which, as it is wholly new, so it has something solid and real, of no expense and little trouble, full in our own power, and whereby we can incur no danger in disobliging England. For this kind of commodity will not bear exportation, and flesh being of too tender a consistence to admit to a long continuance in salt, though perhaps I would name a country that would be glad to eat up our whole nation without any seasoning. After all, I am not so violently bent upon my own opinion as to reject any offer proposed by any wise men which shall be found equally innocent, cheap, easy, and effectual. But before something of that kind shall be advanced in contradiction to my scheme and offering better, I desire the author will be pleased to consider 2 points. First, as things now stand, how will they be able to find food and raiment for 100,000 mouths and backs? And secondly, there being a round million creatures in humane figures throughout this kingdom, whose whole subsistence put into a common stock would leave them in debt, adding those who are beggars by profession, to the bulk of the farmers, cottagers, and laborers with their wives and children, who are beggars in fact, I desire those politicians who dislike my plan and may perhaps be so bold to attempt an answer that they will first ask the parents of these mortals whether they would not at this day think it a great happiness to have been sold for food at a year old, and thereby have avoided such a perpetual scheme of misfortunes as they have since gone through, by the oppression of their landlords, the impossibility of their paying rent without money or job, the want of common subsistence with neither house nor clothes to cover them from the weather, and the most inevitable prospect of entailing the like or greater miseries upon their children forever. I profess in the sincerity of my heart that I have not the least personal interest in endeavoring to promote this necessary work, having no other motive than the public good of my country, by advancing our trade, providing for infants, relieving the poor, and giving some pleasure to the rich. I myself have no children which I can propose to get a single penny from, the youngest being 9 years old, and my wife past childbearing. Sincerely, Jonathan Swift, 1729. Well, yeah, if you just change the names of some of the players, the story sounds very familiar, doesn't it? I don't know if that's good or bad, that things haven't gotten any worse or that they haven't gotten any better. Oh, sure. Well, as I said, I was going to read you something beautiful, but I won't because we don't have time to do that. But I will recommend to you Louise Glick's latest, her final anthology of poetry has come out in paperback now, Winter Recipes from the Collective. She died last year. She won the Nobel Prize, I guess, 3 or 4 years ago now. Anyway, this is fun because she's old herself and she's visiting her sister in a nursing home, and some of it's painful and some of it's hilarious. Like the scene where she and her sister are sitting there drinking gin in glasses over rocks in her sister's room, and the nurse comes in and says, "Great, you're hydrating," because gin is clear. Anyway, so thank you for listening to Jonathan Swift. I said you can see why he wouldn't stay out of my head.